good.
Hi, how are you doing?
Hey, how y'all?
I'm fine.
Always make sure it's on. Good evening, how you doing? I'm going to try and get a song out of this 12-string guitar before it goes out of tune in cold. I will use it to make sure everything sounds alright. Sure, you ride the finest horse I've ever seen, standing 6 feet or 1 or 2, with eyes wild and green. And you ride that horse so well, hands light to the touch. I could never go with you no matter how I wanted to. So ride on, see you. I could never go with you no matter how I wanted to. So ride on, see you. I could never go with you no matter how I wanted to. It gets cold on that door, I tell you. When you ride into the, still it could have been worse, it could have been last night. When you ride into the night without a trace behind, you run your comb along my guts one last time, and turn to face the empty space where you used to lie, and look for the spark that lights in the night through the teardrop in my eye. So ride on, see you. I could never go with you no matter how I wanted to. So ride on, ride on. Thank you very much. I don't know what we said on the sheet. I don't really know how to describe what I do. I do Irish stuff. So I sing. There was a piano down here. I was very worried because I don't play the piano. So it was going to be a very large coaster. But I'm glad they moved it.
So,
all this stuff really came about because it was St. Patrick's Day a couple of years ago and I was missing home. And in Ireland they'd have singing, you know, and you'd have people gathering together in homes. And they'd have a good time, you know. And I missed that a lot, and I missed the poetry and the stories and all that sort of stuff. And I decided if I couldn't be there, then I'd go down to my local retirement community up in North Raleigh I was at the time, and share the Irish thing with them. And so I did, and it kind of went from there, and now I do it all over. I was in Austin last week. Does that sound good? Yeah, I was in Austin last week. And it's taken on a bit of a life of its own, and when I say I enjoy it, thank you so much, it's great because you're my surrogate family. Really, you're replacing that. So now, I'm going to start with a couple of songs. 1 second, I need this. Great themes of Irish songs. War, we have a few of those. Romance, we have some of those. And another great theme of Irish stuff is being thrown out of Ireland. And then being away and want to go home, you know? It reminds me of that great Irish joke. The Irish boomerang. It's a stick, and when you throw it, it doesn't come back to you. It lies on the floor singing about wanting to go home. Alright, so we'll start with a couple of these songs about wanting to be home. In Ireland. Sunday, so we never get to Mass. It's a long, long way from Clare to here. It's a long, long way from Clare to here. It's a long, long way. It gets further day by day. It's a long, long way from Clare to here. When Friday night comes around, there's only it's fighting. You know me now, like a letter home, but I'm too tired for writing, and it's a long, long way from Clare to here. It's a long, long way from Clare to here. It's a long, long way. It gets further day by day. It's a long, long way from Clare to here. And it almost breaks my heart when I think of Josephine. You know I told her I'd be coming home with pockets full of green. It's a long, long way from Clare to here. It's a long, long way from Clare to here. It's a long, long way. It gets further day by day. It's a long, long way from Clare to here. Sometimes I hear a fiddle play, or maybe it's a notion, and I dream I see white horses dance on that other ocean. It's a long, long way from Clare to here. It's a long, long way from Clare to here. Oh, it's a long, long way. It gets further day by day. It's a long, long way from Clare to here. No, it's a long, long way. It gets further day by day. It's a long, long way from Clare to here. In 1803, as we sailed out to sea, out from the sweet town of Derry, for Australia bound, if we didn't all drown, and the marks on our feathers we carry. In rusty iron chains we sighed for our wings, our good wives we left in sorrow. As the mainsails unfurled, our curses we hurled on the English and floods of tomorrow. No, I wish I was home in Derry. No, I wish I was home in Derry. Now Van Diemen's Land is a hell for a man, or to live out his life in slavery, where the climate is raw and the gun makes the wall. Now the wind or rain, careful referee. 20 years have gone by and I've ended no on. I'm a comrade, skill star behind me. When a rebel I came and I'll die just the same. On the cold winter nights you will find me. No, I wish I was back home in Derry. No, I wish I was back home in Derry. No, I wish I was back home in Derry. Good and a little sad, which reminds me of the great English poet G.K. Chesterton. He said, the great gales of Ireland are men that God made mad, for all their wars are merry, and all their songs are sad. He's not the only one that had something to say about the Irish. Sigmund Freud on the Irish. The only nation on earth for whom psychoanalysis is of no use whatsoever. I'll tell you what we did to Sigmund. song done by Bing Crosby. Oh, a while ago. Let's just say it's a while ago. And it covers the first bit of poetry. I do a little bit of Irish poetry here and there. And it's the first bit of poetry I'm going to do this evening. It's by a man called John Locke. It's called The Exile's Return. It's about an Irishman going back to Ireland after 40 years in New York. And standing on the prow of the ship and seeing the mountains of Connemara as the dawn breaks over the west of Ireland, and the beauty of Galway Bay, and the islands in there, Arran Islands, Arranmore and Arranbeo, they're sitting in the bay. It's gorgeous. So the poem is called The Exile's Return, and then obviously the song is Galway Bay. Dawn over the hills of Ireland, God's angels lifting the night's black veil from the fair sweet face of my Sireland. Oh Ireland, isn't it grand to look like a bride in her rich adorning? With every pent-up beat of my heart, I bid you top of the morning. If you ever go across the sea to Ireland, then maybe at the dawning of your day, you will sit and watch the moon rise over Claddagh and watch the sun go down on Galway Bay, just to hear again the ripples of the trout stream and the women in the meadow making hay, just to sit beside the turf fire in the cabin and watch the barefoot gossoons at their play. A gossoon is a young Irish lad, usually up to no good. For the breeze is blowing o'er the sea from Ireland, are perfumed by the heather as they blow, and the women in the upland digging pretties, potatoes, speak a language that the strangers do not know. If there's going to be a life hereafter, and somehow I think there's going to be, I will ask my God to let me make my heaven in that dear land across the Irish Sea. So if you ever go across the sea to Ireland, then maybe at the dawning of your day, you will sit and watch the moon rise over Claddagh and watch the sun go down on Galway Bay. Here's a very sad story.
This guy.
Let this be a lesson to all men. A man walked out of his door one morning in Broadway. There are many Broadways. I lived in a Broadway in Wexford.
Told me to this, yes.
And he met a woman. And it all went downhill from there. But she had beautiful eyes. Her eyes, they shone like diamonds. You'd think she was queen of the land. With her hair thrown over her shoulder, tied up with a black velvet band. As I went walking down Broadway, not intending to stay very long, I met with a handsome young damsel as she came tripping along. And a watch she pulled out of her pocket, and she put it right into my hand. On the very first day that I met her, back to the black velvet band. All of her eyes, they shone like diamonds. You'd think she was queen of the land. With her hair thrown over her shoulder, tied up with a black velvet band. So before the judge and the jury, next morning I had to appear, and the gentleman claimed his jewelry, and the case against me was clear. 7 years long transportation band. Oh, her eyes, they shone like diamonds. You'd think she was queen of the land. With her hair thrown over her shoulder, tied up with a black velvet band. Oh, her eyes, they shone like diamonds. You'd think she was queen of the land. With her hair thrown over her shoulder, tied up with a black velvet, with a black velvet band. Remember to look up here on the second deck, top deck. That was the upper deck too. I never introduced myself, excuse me, that was rude. My name is Simon Power, and I like to do stuff, Irish songs, Irish poetry, some Irish stories, some in English and some in Irish. We'll start that now by saying, Gurmina Mohagib Galera Fartin. Thank you very much for your kind welcome. I'm a sponsor of Rasharishka, Preston Point, Toronto Show. You're very welcome to my little show here at Preston Point this afternoon. It's Mr. Simon de Per Sanaldum Galak Gorman Nehem. My name is Simon Power from Wexford in Ireland. Now, as the formalities over, we all know each other. Right. Oh, I'll do this. This is lovely. This is a very traditional Irish love song. And it's so traditional, in fact, that I found out recently the words are a couple of 100 years old. But the melody is from medieval times, which is brilliant. So I'm standing here in North Carolina, singing a song that they sang in Wexford, Ireland, 1,000 years ago. How cool is that? Anyway, so it's something that, it's a lovely, beautiful love poem. Hang on. My mother said to me, my mother won't mind, nor my father won't slight you for your lack of kind. And she stepped away from me, and she did say, it will not be long love till our wedding day. She stepped away from me, she moved through the fair, and fondly I watched her move here and move there. Then she made her way onward with one star away. As the sun in the evening moves over the lake, and the people were saying, no two were away. For one has a sorrow that never was said. Then she smiled as she passed with her goods and her gear, and that was the last that I saw my dear. I dreamt it last night, my young love came in. So softly she came that her feet made no din. Then she laid her hand on me, and this she did say, it will not be long, love, till our wedding day. My young love said to me, my mother won't mind, nor my father won't slight you for your lack of kind. And she stepped away from me, and she did say, it will not be long, love, till our wedding day. It will not be long, love, till our wedding day. Pretty, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I'm from Wexford, in the very southeast of Ireland. It's a fishing village. I guess it's a town now, but it was a small town when I was there. And the trawlers would be stacked up along the wooden quay. We used to call them the wooden works. And the trawlers would be about half a mile or so, and they'd be stacked 3 deep. And the boys would go out for 3 days at a time. We called them hardy lads. You know, hard-working men, tough lads, you know. So the boys were out for 72 hours on the boat, and they get back into Wexford Harbour, and the first thing they want was a drink. It was 6 o'clock in the morning, so the lads were saying, look, this is not fair, you know. We've been away for 72 hours, you know. So the Irish government and local authorities thought about this for a while and came up with a very civilised solution. We thought, on reflection, if a man's worked for 3 days solid, he deserves a drink. So there was born this wonderful Irish law called the early bar. So it's one that opens at 6 in the morning for the guys that work man shifts and stuff. So the boys used to come straight off the boat and into the bar. And the bar in Wexford, that was an early bar. It's called the Harbour Bar. Small little place. Fishing nets on the ceiling and stuff. It did have a certain fishy smell, I will say. Anyway, here's a fisherman's. As I walked by the dockside one evening so fair, for to view the salt water and taste the salt air, sure I heard an old fisherman singing this song. Won't you take me away, boys, for my time is not long. Wrap me up in me oilskins and blankets, 'tis no more on the dockside of the sea. Oh, tell me, oh shipmates, I'm taking a trip, mates, and I'll see someday in Fiddler's Green. Now Fiddler's Green is a place I hear tell, where fishermen go if they don't go to hell. Where the girls are all pretty and the beer is free, and there's bottles of rum growing from each stream. Now wrap me up in me oilskins and blankets, 'tis no more on the dockside of the sea. Oh, just tell me, oh shipmates, I'm taking a trip, mates, and I'll see you someday in Fiddler's Green. Harp nor rail or not me, just give me a ship and I want go and see. And I'll play me oh squeeze boxes as we sail along, oh, with the wind in the rigging for to sing me this song. Now wrap me up in me oilskins and blankets, 'tis no more on the dockside of the sea. I just tell me, oh shipmates, I'm taking a trip, mates, and I'll see you someday in Fiddler's Green. Now wrap me up in me oilskins and blankets, 'tis no more on the dockside of the sea. I just tell me, oh shipmates, I'm taking a trip, mates, and I'll see you someday in Fiddler's Green. Thank you very much. I like sprinkling little quotes. Is Sean O'Casey, famous Irish playwright, Waiting for Godot, he wrote, which I never quite understood. But one of my favourite quotes is money can't buy you happiness, but it quiets the nerves.
Right.
Spike Milligan, I love Spike Milligan, the English comedian. He said, all I want out of life is a chance to prove that money can't buy me happiness. Right, what did I think? Yes. So, Irish poetry, you can't do anything without doing a bit of W.B. Yeats. And we'll probably do a couple of little bits of W.B. Yeats, but here's the first one. 1916, the year of the Great Irish Rebellion. Thousands of brave men walked into Dublin buildings with certain knowledge that they were going to be beaten. Padraig Pearse walked out onto O'Connell Street, Dublin, and declared Ireland a republic, cherishing the rights and privileges of all of its children. The English sent up gunships up the River Liffey and blew them all to hell. But W.B. Yeats was alive at the time, and he wrote this poem called A Terrible Beauty, because he understood that after what he'd seen, nothing would ever be the same again. So I'll recite a little bit of that, and then I'm going to sing a song called The Foggy Dew, which is about that rebellion. And then at the end of that, I'm going to sing a little song that the soldiers chanted as they marched in to take over those buildings. It's an Irish song. It's called O Roisin Bhallalia, which means O boy, see you welcome home. So we'll start off with a bit of W.B. And was it needless death after all, for England make you faith, for all that is said and done? I know their dreams, enough to know they dreamed and are dead. And what if excess of love bewildered them till they died? I write it out in first MacDonagh and McBride and Connolly and Pearse. Now in whatever green is worn, things are changed utterly. A terrible beauty is born. 'Twas down by the glen one Easter morn, to a city pharaoh died. The armoured lines of marching men, the squadrons passed me by. No pipe did hum, nor battle drum did sound its dread tattoo. But the engine spell, oh, the leafy swell, rang out in the foggy dew. Right proudly high Dublin town, they hung the flag of war. For 'twas better to die in an Irish sky than soothe or soothe a war. And from the plains of royal Meath, proud men came hurrying through, while Britannia's Huns, with their long-range guns, they settled in the foggy dew. But the bravest fell, the requiem bell, it rang so worn and clear, for those who died that Eastertide, the springing of the year. And the world did gaze with deep amaze to those fearless men but few, who bore the fight of freedom's lights and shining in the foggy dew. This is probably the first time I ever put poetry and music together. I was having an Irish themed dinner, and to do it I put quotes up on the walls, which is where a lot of these little quotes come from. And this was one by Patrick Kavanagh, and the poem is Raglan Road. It's a very famous poem, and it talks about how he first met his love, and her dark hair, and how it would weave a snare for him. And it's lovely, it's beautiful and romantic. And as I looked at it, I was singing this song, Black is the Colour of My True Love's Hair. And I thought, well, gee, if ever two things were meant to go together. So this is what started it off. Patrick Kavanagh first. On Raglan Road on an autumn day, I met her first and knew that her dark hair would weave a snare that I might one day rue. Though I saw the danger, yet I walked along that enchanted way, and said, let grief be a falling leaf at the dawning of the day. For black is the colour of my true love's hair. Her lips are like some roses fair. She's the sweetest smile, gentlest eyes. I love the ground whereon she stands. I love my love, I know what she knows. And I love the ground whereon she goes. I wish the day soon would come when she and I can be as one. I'll go to the Clyde, I'm worn and weak, for satisfied writes her a letter, just a few short lines, but I suffered death 1,000 times. For black is the color of my true love's skin. Her lips are like some roses fair. She's the sweetest smile, the gentlest hands. I love the ground whereon she stands. For black is the color of my true love's face. So on to Dublin, and this is a song called The Rare Old Times, and it paints a very picturesque view of Dublin, because when I lived in it, it wasn't as nice as it is today. But the Dubliners have a great sense of humour. Brendan Behan, he's a very famous Irish poet, playwright and drunk, and famous for all three. On a particularly bad weekend, he woke up in hospital on a Sunday morning and there was a nun looming over him. And he looked at me and goes, "Oh, geez, oh, bless you, sister, may all your sons be bishops." Which was just wrong on so many levels, it was hilarious. And the Dubliners, when they were trying to rebuild a lot of the city, and they spent a lot of money on statues, really beautiful. The Dubliners have got a great sense of humour. So right in the middle of O'Connell Street, they have a beautiful long fountain. And it's supposed to represent the River Liffey.